The desert had its own kind of silence, a heavy stillness that pressed against the skin and lingered in the ears. The wind carried dust instead of comfort, and the sun felt like a brand upon the earth. Out there, miles from any road or ranch, a woman lay half-conscious beneath a cottonwood tree, her lips cracked, her breathing shallow. The bite on her ankle throbbed with fire, swelling purple and red where the snake's fangs had struck. She had been walking for hours before the pain finally took her down. Her bonnet lay somewhere behind her, and the water in her canteen had long been spilled. She tried to cry out once more, but her voice was gone. Stolen by heat and fear, her husband had promised he'd only be gone an hour. They had argued before it happened, sharp words about money, about trust, about leaving the ranch and starting over. He'd gone off for firewood, she thought, but deep down she knew he wasn't coming back. She'd seen it in his eyes before he turned away, that strange emptiness that meant a man was already gone. The desert had taken many things from her, but she hadn't expected it to take him too. She had come west, believing love could survive anything. They'd left behind the noise of the towns, the gossip, and the debts, hoping to build a life where the land was still wild. For a while, it worked. The nights had been filled with laughter, the mornings with work and dust, and a kind of simple peace. But dreams die quiet deaths out there, buried beneath wind and hunger. Then came the drought, and the days turned long and bitter. Cattle died, the well dried up, and tempers grew short. By the time the snake struck, they were strangers under the same roof. Now she lay alone, her skin burning, her vision dimming. Somewhere in the brush, a buzzard called. She tried to remember his face, but all she could see was the way he'd looked back once only, once before disappearing between the rocks. Maybe he hadn't meant to leave her. Maybe he'd gone for help and lost his way. Maybe he was dead too. She pressed her palm to the wound, praying, cursing, then whispering for mercy. The sun dipped lower, spilling orange light across the canyon. The world began to blur. That was when she heard it, the faint rhythm of footsteps in the sand. Slow, careful, measured. At first she thought it was her husband returning, but these steps were too light, too silent. She tried to lift her head, but her body no longer obeyed. Through the haze, she saw the outline of a man standing not far away. Tall and still against the fading light, he wore buckskin that blended into the land, and his long black hair was tied with a strip of leather. His eyes were unreadable, dark as the desert night itself. Apache. She had heard the stories, the raids, the warnings from settlers, the way they moved like shadows through the canyons. Fear should have filled her, but all she felt was a strange calm, as if the earth itself had sent him. He didn't speak, not at first. He crouched beside her, studying the bite. His hands moved with purpose, wrapping a strip of cloth above her ankle, pulling tight to slow the poison. She wanted to ask who he was, why he was there, but her tongue was heavy. He reached into a pouch at his side, drawing out a bundle of dried roots. With quiet focus, he chewed them, then pressed the pulp against the wound. The pain burned hotter for a moment before easing. Night fell quickly, and the air cooled. He built a small fire, using dry sagebrush, that gave off a faint, clean scent. The woman drifted in and out of sleep, her mind caught between gratitude and fear. When she woke again, he was still there, sitting cross-legged by the fire, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The firelight touched his face, revealing no trace of cruelty, only patience and silence. For the first time in days, she felt safe. She watched the way he moved slow, deliberate, like a man who understood the land better than most understand words. He didn't ask her name, nor offer his. Yet something about his presence filled the emptiness her husband had left behind. Morning came with a pale, dusty light. The swelling in her leg had gone down, but weakness clung to her bones. The Apache stood, looking toward the distant ridge. He pointed east, then at her, then to his own chest, as if to say he would take her there. She didn't know what lay east perhaps, a river, a settlement, or nothing at all, but she nodded. He helped her to her feet, his grip steady but gentle. Each step was a battle, the sand soft beneath her boots. The world around them was endless cactus and stone, sun and silence. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but something in his quiet manner kept her words locked inside. They moved without sound, two strangers bound by fate. Hours passed before they found shade again. The Apache gathered water from a seep in the rocks, showing her how to sip slowly so her stomach wouldn't twist. His kindness unsettled her. All her life she'd been told to fear his kind, yet here he was, the only soul between her and death. She wondered what he thought of her, this pale, broken woman who had stumbled into his world. As the second night approached, she began to ask questions in whispers, testing the air. "Where are you from? Do you live nearby?" He never answered, only listened. His silence wasn't cold. It was the silence of someone who carried too many stories to tell. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, the words thick with an accent she didn't know. He said only one thing, "You live." It was both a promise and a command. That night she dreamed of her husband again. He was standing at the edge of a dry riverbed calling her name, but when she tried to reach him, he faded into the dust. She woke with tears on her cheeks and found the Apache watching her. His gaze held no judgment, only understanding. He handed her a piece of dried meat and a strip of leather to chew, keeping her grounded in the moment. By the third day, her strength began to return. The poison had lost its grip, though the wounds still throbbed. The Apache's pace never hurried. He seemed to know exactly where they were going, though she could see no trail. At times he'd pause to study the wind or kneel beside a track in the sand. She followed without question, trusting him more than she had ever trusted her husband. When they reached the ridge, the view opened wide. Far below stretched a green line of trees, a river, glinting faintly in the light. Her heart lifted. Civilization might be near, a town or camp, where she could find help. She turned to thank him, but his expression had changed. He looked uneasy, as if sensing something she could not. In the distance, dust rose, a small cloud moving fast. Riders. The Apache motioned for her to stay low. His hand went to the knife at his belt. She couldn't tell if the riders were friend or foe, but something in his posture told her danger was close. The silence between them grew heavy again, thick with unspoken warning. Her mind raced. Could it be her husband returning, filled with regret? Or outlaws who had followed her trail? She didn't know. The Apache's eyes narrowed, fixed on the horizon. The wind carried faint sounds, hooves, voices, the clink of metal. He turned to her, his voice calm but firm. "Stay." Then he stepped forward, disappearing behind the rocks as the riders drew closer. Her pulse pounded as she watched the dust cloud move nearer. The heat shimmered above the ground, hiding faces and shapes. She couldn't tell if salvation or ruin was coming for her. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting, and then through the glare, she caught sight of a familiar figure among the riders, a man she thought she'd never see again. Her heart lurched as recognition dawned. It was him, the husband who had left her to die. But something in the Apache's stance told her this meeting would not go as anyone expected. The desert was not done with them yet. The woman froze, her breath caught in her throat as the riders drew closer. Dust swirled around them, masking faces until the wind shifted and the truth settled like a stone in her chest. It was him, her husband, sitting tall in the saddle, as if the desert had never touched him. His hat was pulled low, his face shadowed, but she would have known that stance anywhere. For a long moment, she didn't move. She wanted to run to him, to shout his name, but something inside her stopped her cold. There was no joy in seeing him, only confusion and a quiet, aching anger that had been building since the moment he left her behind. The Apache stood a few paces ahead, his figure steady against the fading sun. He hadn't drawn his knife, but his hand rested near it, waiting. The riders slowed, dust settling around their horses' legs. There were 4 of them, her husband and 3 others, all carrying rifles slung across their backs. They looked worn, like men who had been riding for days without rest. When her husband finally spoke, his voice carried across the distance, low but sharp. "You're alive." The words fell flat, more disbelief than relief. He swung down from his horse and stared at her, eyes darting from her face to the Apache beside her. The silence that followed was heavy, full of questions she couldn't yet answer. She wanted to tell him what had happened, that the snake had nearly killed her, that the Apache had saved her life, but the look on his face stopped her. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Not of her, but of the man standing beside her. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, glancing warily at the Apache. "He's dangerous. These people, they're not to be trusted." The Apache said nothing, though his eyes flicked briefly toward her husband. There was something ancient in his gaze, a kind of patience that seemed to see right through the man in front of him. Her husband turned to her again. "I came back," he said quickly, as if the words could erase what he'd done. "I went for help. We were attacked by raiders on the way back." "I thought you were." He stopped, his voice faltering. "You have to believe me." She wanted to believe him, but his words felt too easy, too neat for the mess they were in. Her memory replayed the moment he walked away, the hesitation, the silence that followed. If he had truly gone for help, why had it taken so long to find her? The Apache shifted his stance, his voice calm but firm when he finally spoke. "You left her." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Her husband stiffened. "You don't know what you're talking about." The air thickened between them. The other men on horseback watched quietly, their hands near their rifles, uncertain who the enemy was. The woman's pulse quickened. She could feel something breaking open beneath the surface. Old wounds bleeding into the present. The Apache stepped closer to her, not in threat, but in protection. Her husband noticed and took a step forward of his own. "Stay away from her," he snapped. The Apache's eyes didn't waver. "You left her for the dessert?" For a moment, no one moved. The horses snorted and pawed the ground, sensing the tension. Then her husband's expression shifted, the anger fading into something else, something closer to shame. He looked at her again, and for the first time, she saw the truth flicker behind his eyes. Maybe he hadn't meant to abandon her, but he hadn't fought very hard not to. "Either I didn't think you'd survive," he said quietly. "No one could have." Her throat tightened. "But I did." He looked away, his voice barely above a whisper. "With his help." They camped that night at the edge of the ridge, the uneasy silence stretching between them like a rope ready to snap. The Apache kept his distance, sitting near the fire, sharpening a stone blade. Her husband sat opposite him, restless, unable to hide his discomfort. The other men spoke little, whispering among themselves in tones that carried fragments of worry and suspicion. The woman tried to rest, but her mind wouldn't settle. She replayed every moment since the bite, the pain, the fear. It's the quiet strength of the Apache who had carried her when she couldn't walk. There was something about him that the desert seemed to respect. He didn't fight the land. He moved with it. Her husband, on the other hand, had always tried to bend it to his will. Maybe that was the real difference between them. Later that night, when the others slept, she heard movement near the fire. The Apache was awake, adding wood to the flames. She rose quietly and walked toward him, her injured legs still stiff but stronger. He looked up, his eyes catching the glow. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly. He took a moment before answering. "Because the earth gave you back." She frowned. "What does that mean?" He stirred the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise. "The snake takes life only when the spirit is weak. You fought. You still breathe. The desert does not waste breath." His words were strange, almost poetic, but she understood the meaning. Survival had a way of choosing people. She sat beside him, feeling the warmth of the flames against her face. "Do you know them?" she asked, nodding toward the men sleeping nearby. He shook his head. "No, but I know men like them." Something in his tone made her uneasy. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, her husband stirred, muttering in his sleep. The Apache's gaze drifted toward him, his expression unreadable. The next morning, they broke camp early. Her husband seemed eager to move, keeping himself between her and the Apache. They rode east toward the river, the promise of water and safety driving them forward. The woman sat on the back of her husband's horse, though every step felt like a lie she didn't want to live in. As they traveled, bits of her husband's story began to surface. He told her about the raiders, about how they'd lost their wagon and nearly died. but his words never lined up quite right, and every time she asked for details, his answers grew shorter. The other men avoided her eyes, and that told her more than their silence did. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon, its walls high and red like old wounds. The Apache halted, scanning the ridge above. His posture shifted, alert. "We should not go through," he said quietly. Her husband frowned. "Why not?" "Too quiet," the Apache replied. "No birds. No wind. Only eyes watching." The woman felt a chill crawl up her spine. Her husband laughed it off, brushing past him. "You see ghosts in the rocks. We'll be fine." But they weren't fine. Halfway through the canyon, the echo of hooves came from behind. The Apache spun first, eyes narrowing as a second group of riders appeared, emerging from the shadows. Dust rose, and in it she saw faces hardened by greed bandits, maybe the same ones who had attacked before. Her husband froze, his hand reaching for his rifle too late. The Apache moved like lightning, pushing her behind a rock as the first shot rang out. The canyon exploded with noise. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the air filled with the sharp scent of gunpowder. She covered her ears, trembling, the world spinning around her. When it ended, the silence returned, heavier than before. 2 of her husband's men were down. The rest had scattered, their horses gone. The Apache stood unharmed, calm as if he'd seen this 100 times before. Her husband was alive, though shaken, his face pale beneath the grime. The Apache looked at him, then at her. "They followed you," he said. Her husband didn't deny it. "They wanted the gold," he muttered, almost to himself. "What gold?" she asked, her voice rising. He hesitated. "I found a claim. South of the river. Enough to start over. I didn't tell you because I wanted it to be a surprise. But word got out." The Apache's gaze hardened. "You brought danger to her." Her husband clenched his fists. "I didn't mean to." But intention didn't matter now. The desert had its own justice. They buried the fallen before moving on, the silence between them deeper than ever. The woman walked beside the Apache, her husband leading the way. Each step felt heavier, with what she now knew that she had been left behind, not by accident, but by choice. The sun began to sink again, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. The Apache paused at the ridge, looking west. "They will come again," he said. "Your husband carries more than gold." She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Some burdens couldn't be seen, only felt. And as the desert wind rose around them, she realized her journey was far from over. Somewhere behind them, the echo of hooves whispered across the sand. The next few days dragged by under a burning sun, each hour stretching longer than the last. The woman could feel the tension thickening between the Apache and her husband. A silent war neither seemed ready to start nor end. They traveled cautiously, always watching the horizon, always listening for the sound of riders. The desert was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that came before something terrible. The Apache rarely spoke, though his eyes missed nothing. He walked ahead, reading the land as if it whispered secrets to him. Her husband followed behind, keeping one hand near his rifle, his movements restless. The woman rode in the middle, trapped between 2 worlds that refused to meet. The trust she once had for her husband was cracking apart. But she still clung to some faint thread of hope that maybe he would change. Maybe he would remember who they used to be before greed and fear took over. They reached a dry riverbed one afternoon, where the air shimmered with heat and the rocks were sharp as blades. The Apache stopped suddenly and knelt, tracing the ground with his fingers. "Tracks," he said softly. "For horses, not old." Her husband stiffened. "They're following us again." The Apache nodded once. "They know your trail. They want what you carry." The woman's stomach tightened. She looked at her husband, waiting for the truth she feared. "What is it you're hiding?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. His jaw worked, his eyes darting from her to the Apache. "Just gold dust," he said finally. "A few small bags. That's all." The Apache's gaze was sharp. "You risked her life for that?" Her husband's face hardened. you wouldn't understand. You people live off the land because you've got nothing else to lose. Apache rose slowly, his shadow long across the sand. The land gives everything if you listen. But men like you only take— The woman stepped between them before the tension could explode. "Stop it," she said, her voice trembling. "Both of you." She turned to her husband, tears stinging her eyes. "If gold means more to you than your word, then we're already lost." He said nothing. But his silence said enough. That night they made camp in a narrow canyon where the rocks glowed faintly under the moon. The Apache kept watch, his bow across his knees, while the others tried to sleep. The woman lay awake, her thoughts twisting like smoke. Every sound in the darkness made her flinch: the rustle of wind through the brush, the distant cry of a coyote. She felt the desert closing in, as if the land itself were holding its breath. Near midnight, she heard a whisper of movement. Not the Apache. Not her husband. Something else. She sat up, peering into the darkness, her heart pounding. Then came the faint clink of metal, the low murmur of voices. The Apache was already on his feet, silent as stone. He motioned for her to stay down, then melted into the shadows. The next moment, the canyon erupted in chaos. A gunshot split the night, echoing off the rocks. The woman screamed and ducked as bullets sparked against the stone beside her. Her husband grabbed his rifle, firing wildly toward the sound. The air filled with smoke and the sharp smell of gunpowder. When the noise finally stopped, two men lay motionless near the edge of camp. The Apache emerged from the darkness, his movements calm despite the blood on his arm. He had fought like the wind itself, silent, precise, unstoppable. Her husband stumbled forward, breathing hard. "You led them here," he spat. "You and your people." The Apache didn't answer. He simply stared at him, the firelight flickering across his face. "They followed you," he said. "Your greed leaves a trail wider than your horse." The woman turned to her husband, her voice shaking. "Is it true? Did they come because of you?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation she found her answer. He had made deals, promises he couldn't keep, trading whispers of gold for help he never paid for. Those men hadn't been raiders, they had been partners once. Partners who wanted their share. The Apache looked toward the horizon. "More will come," he said. "You must move before sunrise." They left before dawn, the sky still gray and cold. The Apache walked ahead again, guiding them through the jagged canyons where the sun couldn't reach. The woman followed close behind, the ache in her leg a reminder of how fragile life had become. Her husband rode in silence, his shoulders heavy with guilt, though pride still kept his eyes hard. The land grew rougher as they went. Rocks turned to cliffs, and the wind carried the faint scent of rain. The Apache led them to a small plateau overlooking the valley below. From there, the woman could see miles of barren land, streaked with dry riverbeds and dead brush. It was beautiful in a cruel way, the kind of beauty that demanded respect. The Apache stopped and turned toward her. "They will not stop," he said. "You must choose," she frowned. "Choose what?" He looked at her husband, then back to her. "The path that saves you, or the one that kills you?" Before she could answer, a sound rose in the distance hooves again, faint but growing louder. Her heart sank. The riders were back, and this time there were more of them. Dust curled like smoke on the horizon. The Apache's expression didn't change. He moved quickly, helping her down behind the rocks. "Stay here," he said. "Do not move." Her husband gripped his rifle. "I'm not hiding." The Apache's eyes met his, steady and cold. "Then you will die standing." Her husband ignored him, climbing to a higher ledge to get a better view. The woman wanted to call out, to tell him to stop, but the words caught in her throat. The first shots came a heartbeat later, sharp and sudden. Her husband fired back, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. Dust rose in clouds around them as the bullets hit stone. The Apache moved through the chaos with the same quiet grace he always had. He fought not for gold, not for pride, but for something she couldn't yet name. His arrows flew swift and true, his movements almost one with the wind. She wanted to help, but fear pinned her where she was. The fight dragged on, the sun climbing higher, the heat pressing down. One by one, the riders fell or fled, But her husband was still firing, even when there was no one left to shoot. His hands shook, his breath ragged. When it finally went quiet, he looked around as if seeing the world for the first time. The Apache approached slowly, his expression unreadable. "It is done," he said. But her husband wasn't listening. He stumbled toward the edge of the ridge, his face pale. "The gold," he muttered. "Where's the gold?" The woman's stomach turned. Even now, after everything, that was what he thought of. She stepped toward him. "It doesn't matter anymore," she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes wild. "It's all that matters. You think we can start over with nothing? You think the world forgives?" Before she could answer, the Apache spoke. "The earth takes what is owed. You cannot buy your way free." Her husband laughed bitterly. "You don't understand. You live like ghosts out here. You don't know what it's like to need." The Apache's gaze hardened. "I know what it's like to lose everything." The wind picked up, carrying the weight of those words. The woman could feel something breaking open between them, something bigger than all three of them. They stood there in silence, the sun sinking lower, shadows growing long. The Apache turned toward the west. "They will come again by night," he said. "We must move before dark." Her husband didn't move. His eyes were locked on the ridge below, where a faint glint caught the light. "That's where it is," he whispered. "I buried it near the stream." The woman's heart sank. "You're not going down there." He didn't answer. He just started walking. The Apache stepped in front of him. "You go there, you die." "I'm not leaving it behind," her husband said, his voice trembling with something between desperation and madness. The woman reached for him, but he pulled away. "I did this for us," he said. "All of it." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "You did it for yourself." The Apache watched quietly, the muscles in his jaw tight. Finally, he spoke. "If you go, I cannot save you." Her husband hesitated only a moment before pushing past him. The woman stood frozen, torn between following and staying. The Apache looked at her, his voice low. "The desert tests every soul. Some pass, some do not." The sun slipped behind the rocks, painting the world in blood-red light. Down below, her husband moved toward the stream, unaware of the shadows waiting beyond it. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of movement. More riders. "They are here." The woman felt her heart stop. The ridge seemed to hold its breath, caught between night and day. Her husband was walking straight into danger. She didn't know if there was still time to save him. The Apache stepped forward, bow in hand, his voice steady. "Stay behind me." And in that suspended moment, before the first shot cracked through the air again, the desert went completely still, as if the land itself was waiting to see who would survive the storm that was about to break. The first shot echoed through the canyon, sharp and final, like the crack of a breaking world. The woman flinched, dropping to her knees behind the rocks as dust rained down around her. The Apache stood firm, bow in hand, eyes locked on the ridge below where her husband had vanished. The air trembled with tension, every breath filled with dust and fear. She could see faint movement near the stream. Her husband was caught in the open, crouched near the ground, clawing at the earth like a man digging for his last hope. The Apache drew an arrow, loosed it, and another gunshot rang out in answer. The sound rolled through the desert like thunder. Her heart pounded as she tried to see through the haze. Then she heard it, a cry, rough and short, swallowed by the wind. She knew that voice. Her husband had been hit. Without thinking, she ran forward. The Apache shouted for her to stop, but her feet didn't listen. The rocks tore at her hands as she stumbled down the slope, her breath burning. She found him near the edge of the stream, half buried in the dirt, his shirt stained dark where the bullet had caught his side. His hand still clutched the small leather pouch, the gold he'd risked everything for. He looked up at her, eyes wide with pain and regret. "I almost had it," he whispered. Tears blurred her vision. "You should have left it," she said softly, kneeling beside him. The Apache appeared behind her, quiet as the wind, scanning the ridge for any sign of more attackers. When he was sure the danger had passed, he crouched beside them. His eyes held no judgment, only the calm understanding of someone who had seen too many endings like this one. Her husband's breathing grew shallow. "I thought I was doing right," he said weakly. Wanted to give you more than dust and dreams. She took his hand, her voice trembling. I never wanted gold. I just wanted you. He tried to speak again, but his strength was gone. His gaze drifted toward the horizon, and with one last shallow breath, he was still. The silence that followed felt endless. The desert, so vast and cruel, seemed to hold its breath in mourning. The Apache bowed his head for a moment, then gently took the pouch from the man's lifeless hand. Without a word, he opened it and let the gold dust scatter into the stream. The tiny flakes caught the dying light, glimmering like pieces of a broken promise. The woman watched them drift away, carried by the water until they vanished. They buried him at the base of the canyon, where the rocks met the river's edge. The Apache built a small cairn of stones, setting them with careful hands. When it was done, he stepped back and said quietly, "The desert remembers." She stood beside him, staring at the mound of earth. "Do you think he found peace?" she asked. The Apache looked toward the sunset. "Peace is not found," he said. "It is made." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from far off. The woman closed her eyes, feeling the first cool drops on her skin. It had been so long since she'd felt rain. It washed over her, soft and clean, as if the land itself had decided to forgive. They stayed near the canyon that night, sheltered by the rocks. The fire crackled low, and she sat watching the flames dance in the dark. The Apache sat nearby, silent as ever, working on an arrowhead with steady hands. She studied him, the way he moved with quiet strength, the calm that never left him. There was something healing about his presence, something that steadied her even in grief. "Why did you save me?" she asked after a long time. He paused, setting down the stone. "Because you still fight to live," he said. "Many stop fighting long before death comes." She thought about that, about all the days she had given up hope and yet somehow kept walking. Maybe the desert hadn't been trying to kill her after all. Maybe it had been trying to make her stronger. In the morning, they set out again, this time heading north. The rain had cooled the land, and for the first time, the air felt gentle. Flowers bloomed from cracks in the stone, small but stubborn. The Apache moved ahead, guiding her with patience, showing her where to find water where the shade was strongest. Each day she grew steadier, the weakness fading from her step. They didn't talk much, but they didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. She began to see the desert through his eyes, as something alive and sacred. The same land that had taken her husband had also given her a second chance. After several days, they reached a small valley where the grass grew taller and the river ran clear. The Apache stopped and turned to her. "You are safe here," he said. "The towns are a day's walk east. You can go home." She looked at him, realizing that she didn't know what home meant anymore. The thought of returning to empty walls and memories made her chest ache. "What about you?" she asked. He looked toward the hills. "My path goes west. There are others waiting." She hesitated. "Will I see you again?" His eyes met hers. "The desert is wide, but it remembers those who walk with honor." Then he nodded once and turned away, disappearing into the tall grass. She watched until he was gone, a dark shape fading into the light. The woman stayed by the river for a while, letting the days pass quietly. She built a small shelter, gathered water, and learned to listen to the sounds of the wild. Each morning, she watched the sunrise paint the sky gold and thought of all she had lost and all she had found. One evening, she took off her ring and placed it in the river. The current caught it quickly, carrying it away just as it had carried the gold. It didn't feel like loss this time. It felt like letting go. Seasons changed. The drought lifted, and the land softened again. Travelers began to pass through the valley ranchers. Hunters, settlers, each one chasing something different. Some stopped to rest by her fire, and she would share what little she had. Sometimes she would mention the silent Apache who had once saved her life, and they would listen, eyes wide with wonder, as if she were speaking of a legend. In truth, he had become one. She never saw him again, but there were days when she felt his presence in the wind, guiding her steps, reminding her that peace was something you earned by living, not by running from pain. Years later, when she finally left the valley. She carried only what she could fit in a small sack water: bread, a blanket, and a smooth stone she had found near the stream. On it were faint carvings, marks like the ones the Apache had used on his arrows. She didn't know if he had left it for her, but she liked to believe he had. The world beyond the valley had changed, but she walked through it with a kind of quiet strength she hadn't known before, wherever she went. People saw it in her eyes, the calm of someone who had faced the desert and lived. When she finally reached a small town near the edge of the plains, she settled there, helping others who came lost or wounded. They called her the Desert Woman, the one who knew how to heal. She never told them the whole story. Some things belonged to the wind and the sand alone, but every now and then, when the sun dipped low and the light turned red, she would look west and whisper a quiet thanks. The gold, the loss, the sorrow, it all felt small now compared to what she had gained. The desert had taken much from her, but it had also taught her what mattered most: love, courage, mercy, and the strength to begin again in the end. Her husband's grave was still there beneath the canyon stones, untouched by time. The wind carried across it softly, whispering through the sage. And though the world moved on, the land never forgot. It remembered the woman who survived the snake, the man who lost his way, and the silent Apache who turned fate's cruelty into something almost kind. The desert always remembers top of form, bottom of form.